Today we've got a big topic, so let's dive right in. We wanted to talk about Atlus's crown jewel, Persona 5 Royal. Just came out for the Switch after quite a long time. We'll get into that a little bit too.
Yeah.
We've had a little bit of Persona 5 on the Switch so far. So, Joker was in Smash Bros. We had
Yeah,
the Persona 5 Strikers game. Did you play Strikers?
I did. I didn't beat it. I got sidetracked with a lot of other things. It came out at a pretty bad time for me, but I played through about the first, I don't know, maybe 8 or so hours of it. It was a lot of fun. Plan to go back and beat it eventually, but didn't finish it.
It was just always kind of odd that we had Joker and Smash, we had Strikers,
Yeah.
and we just never got Persona 5. But anyway, finally made its way to the Switch. And here's actually something pretty crazy to think about while I was preparing for this episode. I realized that Persona 5 is older than the Switch is.
Wow. Is that just the JP version? Is that the US release?
That's a good question. It might just be the Japanese release, but I believe it came out in 16 and the Switch got released in
September,
17.
yeah, September 15, 2016 was Persona 5. Wow, I did not realize that. That is news to me. Dang. Yeah. Played it originally too, so it's been a long time.
It's a long time to wait, and so we're coming at this as I'm coming at it as a newcomer to the Persona series. You are a series vet,
Yep.
so I'm interested to hear both of our perspectives on this. I've been playing. I'm about 20 hours into Royal on the
Oh, so
Switch.
you just like got through the tutorial basically. Is that if I understand
well,
correctly? You just kind of right through the opening chapter.
well, you say that, but I'm 20 hours in and I'm still getting tutorial pages all the time.
Yeah.
It's
Yep.
like, here, learn this new thing. Here's this brand new part of the life sim that you've got to figure out if you want to really get the most out of this game.
Yeah, it's a hefty chunk of a game. I know we've talked a little bit about it on the show in the past, just because I'm a big fan of the series, but I think my playthrough of the original Persona 5, and this is not the Royal, remaster, I guess, was around 85 hours. First time I played it, and that was I took my time. Yes, and there's not a ton in the way of like side content in the game, I guess. Unless we'll get into that when we talk about like the life sim stuff, but not really much in the way of side quests or anything like that. So 85 hours is pretty standard, I think, for a run through of the original. And then Royal adds a whole extra layer on top of that. But so, as someone who's never played the Persona series, right? You're most the most experience you have with Atlus RPGs of this genre of this style is Shin Megami Tensei V, correct? Was that the first Shin Megami Tensei game that you played?
Yeah. Outside of that, really just Catherine.
Hmm.
I've played that.
Yeah.
Some of their other games. Let's see, 13 Sentinels. I played through a little bit of that. Their visual novel. But yeah, this is the first one because I guess Persona is an offshoot or spinoff of SMT, right? Do I have that
Originally,
right?
yeah. Yeah, originally the original Persona 1 through 4 really had the subtitle Shin Megami Tensei, Persona 1 2 3 4. But I believe they dropped that finally with Persona 5. It's no longer, the official moniker of the series. It's now just sort of the Persona series. They tried to kind of separate it, right? So they've got kind of two distinct branches now, but largely the DNA is there, right? I mean, the monster fusion, the party based turn based combat, procedurally. Well, actually, it used to be sort of like procedurally generated kind of dungeons, but they've streamlined those recently and made more curated and authentic dungeons in the most recent entries. But a lot of stuff from Shin Megami Tensei laid the foundation for Persona. But how are you liking it so far? I mean, 15, 20 hours in, you've got a taste of it. I mean, you've probably cleared a palace or two, I imagine. What are your initial impressions? Because I mean, everybody knows my thoughts on the series, but I'm really curious because we haven't really talked much about your experience. I've been kind of waiting for this conversation to hear those initial impressions.
Yeah. So let me start here. One of the reasons why I've been putting this game off for so long is because of that time commitment.
Hmm.
I mean, 80 hours, I think that's pretty standard, like 70 to 80 hours. Everybody I've talked to has said that.
Yeah.
That's really intimidating for me. And I love RPGs, but that's like two, shorter RPGs. Um, and I didn't know if it would be one of those games that you really have to play the first 30 hours to figure out if you like it or not. I
Yeah.
wasn't
Right.
willing to put that kind of time into it. So I actually bought Persona 5 for my PlayStation. I got a used
Hmm.
PS4 copy and I was going to play it there. And then I just kept putting it off and putting it off. And then when it got announced for the Switch, I was like, well, I'll just wait for the Switch version.
Yeah.
But yeah, 20 hours in now. And it's not one of those games that you have to play for 20 or 30 hours to like it hooked me instantly. I think
Nice.
being a really big fan of SMT5 helped, right? Because
Yeah.
it's a lot of the same mechanics. I mean, it reminds me a lot of that game. A lot of the
Hmm.
monsters are the same. Um, but I've cleared the first palace. I'm kind of taking my time with the second one and doing some side stuff along the way. But I'm like at the treasure, so I've just got to go in there and beat the
Yeah.
boss.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, man, I am really enjoying it. Like, you know me, I love like the farming sim stuff and some of the other
Hmm.
life sim games. And this game really scratches that itch too, in addition to the grinding RPG stuff that I just find really satisfying to like gradually move up level by level.
Hmm.
Um, the life sim stuff really stuck with me in a way that I didn't think that it would. You made a
Yeah.
really good point earlier about there aren't really side quests. They're just
Hmm.
all these optional things, but immediately how that optional thing is going to play into my character stats
Right.
or how it's going to progress the story in one way or another. So I don't know, it
Yeah.
feels really tight.
Yeah, for those of you that have never played a Persona game before, I think it's a good idea if we stop for a second and just explain kind of what makes a Persona game different from a Shin Megami Tensei or a Final Fantasy or something like that. And we've been touching on it a little bit already. Justin was just talking about this life sim element, but the game is really broken up into what is essentially, in my opinion, two very different games mashed together, right? There's the dungeons, right, which are known as palaces in Persona 5, which you have a series of these that you have to complete one palace every month or so of in-game time. Um, and if you don't complete it, right, the game ends. But in between the palaces, right, while you're prepping your gear and training to dive into the palace, um, there's an entire life simulator game. Right, your characters are high school kids who are, your character is basically living in another city from his hometown because of some issues with the law at the beginning of the game. These aren't really spoilers. It's the first couple minutes, um, and so he's trying to settle in at this new school and make friends and get to know people in the town. And he gets pulled into this wild. I guess essentially alternate reality, right? That exists inside the minds of people with some issues, and when you're not in the dungeons actually trying to clear these really intricate long dungeons, you're
Yeah.
doing day-to-day high school activities, going to gym class, helping your friend train for his get himself back in running shape. You're going to the local burger shack and trying to scarf down the biggest challenge you can to up your gut skills and things like that. Going to movies with other
Studying,
players, studying, yeah, right.
right?
It's
Yeah.
And you're on a limited time, right? Each day you have a couple of things you can do in the the early day, the midday, the late day, but you never have enough time for everything you want to do, right? There's never enough time to do everything. So there's this nice like balance between, do I dive into the palace, try to clear a good distance into that before I run out of, health and magic and then jump back and rest for the night? Or do I do all the life sim for, 25 days and then jump into the palace at the last possible minute and try to clear it, without failing before I run out of time? And so there's this fun little, economy between life sim and dungeon crawling that I think works really well. That not many other games were doing before Persona, right? Not a lot of games were mashing up those two um, components. In fact, I think one that maybe leans heavier in the sim stuff but lighter on the combat is something like a Rune Factory. I
Hmm.
know the comparison's not perfect, but in some ways, this is like the more RPG heavy Rune Factory, right? Obviously, there's not like the farming sim stuff like that, but there are sim elements like those games that I think work well. But how do you feel about the life sim stuff? Because I'm not, I don't recall your thoughts on visual novels, but to me, the life sim stuff feels like playing through, a little point and click adventure visual novel more than an actual, RPG in some ways.
Yeah, I was never a huge fan of point and click adventures up until, well, I was like in the 90s, right? Like
Hmm.
old, like big box PC point and click adventures. Like I was into
Hmm.
those. Um, but really since then, not so much, especially on the Switch, until I got my Steam Deck. And
Yeah.
I think we talked about this in the Steam Deck pod. Those the trackpads made it feel like you could play a point and click adventure on a handheld without a mouse, right?
Hmm. Yeah.
So I've been gravitating towards a lot of them recently just on the Steam Deck. And I think you're right to point out that Persona 5 feels a lot like that. I mean, you're not doing the point and click stuff, but you're moving around, talking to different people, and they're like really extended pieces of dialogue.
Hmm.
Sometimes you're interacting, but a lot of times you're just listening. You're just there taking in the scene, and it does feel like a visual novel to me. Um, but I really like the life sim stuff. Like I think there's this perfect
Yeah.
balance of the dungeon crawling, which I love doing dungeon crawling, but I can't do an entire game of it. Like if it's too one-sided,
Hmm.
I'm just not into it. Like the roguelite stuff, I'm just not super into. Um,
Yeah.
so it's got that, and it, I mean, you mentioned this earlier. It's sort of like you can just take it as much as you want. Like you can try to go through in the palace in a single try, right? Or you can do a little bit, hop out, do some life sim stuff, and come back. So you get to take it on your own at your own pace. But the life sim stuff is a good like breakup for a lot of the dialogue that actually happens. Like I love going to the batting cages, right? So
Yeah.
you go to the batting cages, and that's sort of like a cool little mini game. And some of the life sim stuff is like mini game like, and other pieces, not so much. Like studying is really just choosing how to spend your time. But I think they do a really good job of varying the types of life sim stuff. Like I'm thinking about spending time with certain characters, right? To
Hmm.
deepen your bond with them versus going to a batting cage and playing this little mini game
Yeah.
versus I don't know, like going to the laundromat and cleaning some of the equipment that you found in the
Right.
dungeon that's dirty, right? Like there's a really good mix of that stuff that keeps it interesting.
Yeah, and you've got to play into, with the life sim stuff. I think what's cool about that is you have to play into, what is the day of the week going to be? Is it, certain days of the week, certain options are available to you. If the weather is a certain way, you might be able to hang out with people at different times. Time of day matters. So, like, you have to juggle not only, what you do, but when you do it, which makes, some strategic element to downtime in a way that, like, a lot of games don't force you to think about. Where if you want to get the most out of the life sim side of the game, you really do have to plan out. Look at the calendar, plan out your week, and think about okay, Tuesday's coming up. I know if it's a Tuesday, I can head over to the doctor's office and I can get a session in with her to strengthen that bond and hopefully get better items. So when I jump into the dungeon, right, I'll now have access
Yeah.
to a stronger medicine that restores my magic, and I can stay in the dungeon longer. And it's all these little like snowballing decisions that at first feel like really overwhelming because there's so many different people you can talk to, so many different places you can visit. And then once you start to know the characters that you're meeting, and what rewards they kind of offer, you can choose who you want to play with. I mean, for example, the doctor I was talking about was probably the first character that I tried. Like whenever there was an option, I would try to go spend time with them because I wanted access to more items. And eventually they give you an item that slowly restores your MP over time, like as you're walking through the palaces, which makes it so that instead of needing 2 or 3 days to get through the palaces because I'd run out of MP, and once you're out of MP, you're pretty much screwed.
Yeah, you're
Um,
done.
yeah, and there's not really convenient ways or cheap ways to restore it. But once I got that item, I could then spend an extra 2 or 3 days in the life sim stuff because I could focus my attention on that because I could restore my MP more conveniently in the palaces. And that really changed up the way I played the game in general. Whereas I never really used your characters in combat. They have, magic, melee attacks, and guns, right? They've got ranged attacks, and I never really used the range attacks. So there's a guy who, spruces up your guns for you, toy guns that turn into real guns when you enter the palaces. And I never really spent a lot of time with him in my first playthrough when I played, the base game, because it wasn't a benefit that I cared about, and so I was able to kind of
Hmm.
balance my time based off of the characters that I liked and the rewards I wanted to seek. And so it allows you to kind of play that way to kind of curate what it is you want to experience from the life sim and how much of it you want to experience, which I thought was, done really well in the game.
So you've played through this game a couple of times.
Hmm.
Is there a wrong way to play it? Like, can you lock yourself out of things, like big
No.
things, if you no?
Well, I guess so. the The only problem is those time limits on the palaces. If you're new to Persona and you don't balance that well, like if you're not familiar with Persona games or Shin Megami Tensei games, the systems can be a little overwhelming. Knowing how to
Yeah.
target weaknesses, how to build demons through demon fusion is really complex. And so there are, benefits, for example, to spending time with someone while holding a demon of their tarot, right? So like each character you interact with is assigned one, card from a tarot deck, right? They've got they have a symbol like the tower, the death, and all of this. And if you have a demon that matches that tarot, you get bonuses for hanging out with those people, right? Which can speed up the rewards and things like that, and make it so you need fewer days of interaction with them. Similarly, right, if you build a party with a wide array of status protections and attacks, you can pretty much go up against any set of enemies and clear through it really easily because you can press turn attacks, which are extra attacks if you target an enemy's weakness, or steal back turns if you manage to defend against weaknesses of your own. And so the game really encourages you to experiment with that side of stuff. And if you've never done that before and you decide to wait, till the day before you have to clear a palace, you're going to enter that palace, you're going to get stomped about halfway through it, or you're going to get halfway through it, realize you don't have the resources to take on the boss, and you're in trouble. Not to mention, some palaces force you back out at a certain point. And
Right.
so if you go into them with not enough time remaining, you'll hit that wall, get thrown back out, and not be able to complete the palace in time. So
What
there,
happens if you don't complete the palace on time? I mean,
game
is it a
over,
game
and it
over?
sends you back. It sends you back a handful of days. So like you get kicked back out and then sent back. I think it's like a week or something like that, right? So you're thrown back far enough that you can pull it off. At least I think that's how they added it in at least the royal version. You can do it that way. I don't know for sure. Full transparency. I never ran into that issue because again, I've played these games enough times. I've played every Persona game, and I tend to follow a pretty rigid path through them. So I didn't run into that issue, but I know people that did encounter situations where they waited too late, weren't prepared for the palace that they entered, and were thrown back out. Game over, back a week, had to do it all over again. So it can be a little frustrating if you don't know how to balance that stuff. But at this point, right, there's thousands of guides that are pretty much spoiler free, but give you a really good idea of best practices for like spending time with people if you want to get like the true ending on your first playthrough, or stuff like that. But for the most part, you can pretty much go through blind and just pick the stuff you want to do and succeed.
Let's talk about the combat for a second. You were hinting about being able to chain your attacks together,
Hmm.
and effectively stopping a lot of enemies from even being able to lay a hand on you.
Yeah.
um, this game can be massively broken if you know how to use
Oh yeah,
that functionality. And I guess my experience with SMT5 helped, because as soon as I realized that it was a similar
yeah,
combat
yeah,
style, it's like, oh man, I can just roll through like this first dungeon. It gets a little harder in the second one towards the end, but the
yeah,
first
yeah.
dungeon I was going through and never even getting touched by some of the enemies.
Yeah, it's that's kind of one of the things that I've always loved about the Persona games is that while they are very difficult and sometimes bordering on unfair, like you can enter a battle, and if you don't have the initiative and you've stacked your team with poor weakness, poor resistances, you can get taken out in a single turn, right? Like it's possible for that to happen to you. You jump in, don't have a chance to move, you're dead, game over, try again. But the reverse is also possible. The game can be broken very easily for people that like to grind and plan out complex demon builds and stuff like that, because the game encourages you to constantly sacrifice your party demons to fuse stronger ones with better attacks and resistances and things like that. And it really rewards you for understanding how to play the game. In fact, I think the best anecdote about this is that the hardest difficulty in Persona 5 Royal is, I think it's called Maniac mode, where like
I
I think
think
it's
you're right.
three times damage for targeting an enemy's weakness, but you also receive significantly more damage. But it's so broken, in fact, that the hardest difficulty is actually easier than hard, because once you know how to play the game, that bonus to experience and damage makes it so that you over level real quickly and can take out enemies in single turns without breaking a sweat. The game encourages you to know the systems and play to those strengths. So it's, I'm a big fan of any game that lets you build like a really overpowered party, right? I love when a
Me
game
too.
encourages you to just like break it. And I think Persona does that really well. And the more you play through the game, the stronger your bonds with your party members get. Like the more options you have for that, with players jumping in to substitute attacks and follow up, and tap in and out, as if you end up in a battle with bad weakness matchups and stuff like that. So the game really encourages you to kind of dig in and spend time in the menus and learn the systems and the attacks and how to play your party, which I think is you know the best thing about turn-based RPGs, is when they encourage that kind of stuff. Um, are you gravitating towards any one side of the game, the life sim or the combat stuff? Which one are you preferring more during your early hours?
That's a good question. So I've been really focused on one-shotting the dungeons.
Yeah.
Once I get in, I just go as far as I possibly can. And because I like to grind in RPGs, I like to spend a
Hmm.
lot of time like collecting items and stuff. I had so many items from the first few weeks of the game that I could top off my SP and HP in the dungeons and not have to stop. I could just go all the way through,
Yeah, yeah,
get my route down, and then I could spend 2 weeks or so with the life sim stuff. So I don't know if the rest of the game is going to let me continue doing that, but I like doing all the dungeon crawling at once, or as a huge chunk of it at once, come out and then focus on life sim work. I'm not sure which one I like better though, because I think the combat's really fun.
hmm,
The first two dungeons are interesting just from a dungeon design perspective, especially the second one, the museum. We're not giving anything away
yeah,
here.
yeah,
The museum, I think, just it looks gorgeous, and we should talk
yeah,
about just how stylish this game is. It's probably the best looking game aesthetically on the Switch, I think.
yeah, yeah.
Um,
The
but yeah,
UI
that second,
alone is
yeah, exactly.
phenomenal.
Um, but the second dungeon is looks awesome, so I enjoy just being in there. But then when I
Yeah,
come out, it does feel like two totally different games. I like to, like I said, go to the batting cages or reading a book on the train, just trying to up the stats as much as possible. So the stat menu, if you've never played the game before, it's shaped like a star, And at each point of the star is a different attribute. So your guts or your kindness. I can't remember what some of the other ones were. Like precision, I think is another one. But anyway,
Yeah.
there are 5 points. And every time you gain a point, the point of the star gets a little longer. So you can
Hmm.
see if you're like getting really overweighted in one area or another. And I find just trying to get the star sort of even really satisfying. So I'm going to end up with a
Yeah.
really well-rounded character. I don't know what that's going to do for me, but I just hate seeing the star like sort of
Jagging off in
distorted.
one spot, all yeah.
Yep. So if I go too far in one area, I like to try to find like, okay, what can I do to increase my kindness now? Because that one was like the poorest one I had for a long time, and I couldn't really find a good way to do it. So I started renting DVDs, and yeah, just the stuff you could do in this game is
Yeah.
ridiculous. Renting DVDs and studying in the library. Um, I'm really enjoying the life sim part. I think maybe more than the dungeon crawling actually.
Yeah. Yeah, so like speaking of the dungeon crawling though, right? The main sort of dungeons in the game are the palaces, right? These are, crafted dungeons. They're themed around, the essentially the psyches of the villains of the game, right? So palaces are the manifestation of the villains' sort of internal personas, right? Where we get the title from, right? You dive into the personas of these villains and attempt to quote steal their treasure, right, in order to have them experience a change of heart in the real world, right? Like that's the premise of the game. Again, not really spoiling anything. That's just kind of like the ground floor entry level. This is what you do in the game. And those are really really fascinating dungeons. I think some of the best designed dungeons in recent JRPGs. um, they're stylish. They are like layered with a lot of different unique elements for each dungeon. So like there's a different like mechanic that you have to learn in each dungeon to help you progress, and some
There's
of
a
them are
like a
really interesting.
verticality to them too. Like it's
Yeah,
not just like crawling through horizontally. You've got to go up, down, through ducts.
yeah. And
It's
in
multi-layered, yeah.
in Royal, in fact, they redesigned many of the dungeons to add an extra layer of that verticality, because the grappling hook that you have in Royal was not in the base game. That was added
Oh,
later.
okay.
So the dungeons were redesigned to allow new paths, new treasures, and like collectibles that you can find in each of the dungeons. And the grappling hook was part of how they added some verticality to give more space and let the dungeons breathe. And they're all of them, I think, are better in Royal than they were in the base game. But what's really cool about that is the fact that in addition to these really interesting, well-designed, palaces, there's a more traditional Persona um, system, which is the mementos dungeons. Have you dove into that much yet?
Yeah, I've went in I think twice and got down to
Hmm.
like a level 7 or a level
Yeah,
8. I don't like those as much as the I mean, obviously
yeah.
they're not
So
nearly as designed, right? They
no, they're procedurally generated, right? They're
okay,
these
so it is
procedurally
generally
generated
different.
dungeons. So every time you enter, it's going to be different, right? Which pulls from the first, like I said, the first three Persona games. I think even the fourth one, the dungeons were procedurally generated. So when you entered them, the pathways would be slightly different each time, and it made it so they were far less interesting, I think, but it's still like kind of like a fun. I think it makes a really useful grinding, location. I
Mhm.
like when an area is procedurally generated if I'm going to be spending a lot of time in it. And it encourages you to just kind of like, if you're the kind of person who likes to grind and do, um, demon fusion in this game, Mementos is a really great system that allows you to, get some extra training in a safe environment that doesn't require you to jump back into the palaces, right? So it's sort of an extra layer of space for you to play around with demon fusion and to learn a little bit more about the background and lore of the world without spoiling anything. It plays a much bigger role in Royal, right? And so it's more of an afterthought in the original game, but it's a very significant part of later stage royal stuff. So it gets fleshed out, it gets more interesting as it goes. But yeah, the early stages of it are very just like, here's these procedurally generated dungeons. You drive around in, your so there's a character in this game, Mona, who is a character that you meet in the first palace that you enter. It's a cat. You see him all over the marketing for this game. Um, he is some sort of creature related to the palaces and the metaverse that they're in, and he can turn into a car. And so that's the mechanic. You jump into him, you drive around these procedurally generated dungeons and fight monsters. It's a great place to capture, negotiate with new demons, to build out your party and flesh out your demon summoning. To if you want to fill out the book, like it works really well. But I like that there's options for the player, right? Like if I want to, I can jump into the palace and grind there and stuff like that. But sometimes you out level the palaces too quickly, right? And so
Yeah.
then it's like, well, okay, well I'll jump into mementos, then I can at least encounter some different demons and try some different fusion attempts and things like that while I'm waiting to complete the rest of this palace.
And it's important to have that because I didn't realize there would be such a long period of time between palaces. Like there's a
Yeah,
long time where you're not sure who your next target's going to be. You don't know where to go. Yeah, I mean you're
yeah,
literally just doing life sim stuff for hours and hours and hours
yeah.
sometimes, unless you jump into mementos.
Yeah. And I think that's actually a really good point that we haven't really talked about, which is the way that the narrative plays out in this game, right? Because like we've already said that a lot of the life sim stuff feels like a visual novel, but the story of the game itself, right, largely plays out during the life sim, right? Like most of it plays out during these life sim moments, and so there is a lot of text. There's a lot of reading in this game. It is but the voice acting is phenomenal, and it's in most of it. Not all of it, but it's in most of all the main story stuff has good, voice acting and stuff like that.
More than I thought
Um,
it would be. I thought I would
yeah,
be reading a lot more than I'm listening.
yeah, and it's the voice actors are good, the characters are enjoyable and engaging. You continue to meet new characters throughout the game that are all really interesting. I don't think there's a dud in the cast, in my opinion. And the beauty of that is, even though most of the story plays out in the life sim stuff, there are these moments, these periods of time in the game where it kind of pushes you through a cycle of days with like some preset story beats and interesting side activities and things like that. Like there's a summer vacation type moment, and there's some whenever there's school holidays, basically, right, the story kind of like kicks off in big ways, and does some really interesting stuff, which allows you to kind of just immerse yourself in the narrative for a while if you want to. And I will say, I think that this game has a really, really interesting and very well developed narrative that is worth experiencing. It's one of the better JRPG stories, in my opinion. Yes, there's the standard tropes and some anime nonsense throughout, but overall, I think that the game does a really good job with what it's trying to say, and how it builds out, the stakes of what's at play in this universe, in ways that are really, really fascinating. And Royal really like amps that up to 11. I mean, again, without spoiling anything, the Royal editions are, it's almost an entirely additional sequel. Like it's phenomenal stuff, and so it's a big game. I mean, like I said, 8085 was my first playthrough. I ended up about 120 hours playing
Wow.
Royal, when I ended up beating Royal the a few years ago. So you're in for a long one. But it sounds like you're enjoying it so far. It sounds like this is, having only really had Shin Megami Tensei V to base it off of, you know, where do you rank it? I mean, I not rank it, but is it gripping you more than Shin Megami Tensei V did? Is it feeling like you'll probably come out the other side feeling stronger about this one than you did that one?
Yeah, I don't know. SMT5 was just such a tour de force.
Hmm.
Like when that game came out, that was all I could play. I don't feel
Yeah,
that way about Persona 5. Maybe it's
yeah,
because with SMT, you had these huge open zones, right? And you were
Yeah, yeah.
exploring them, pushing the narrative as quickly as you wanted to, or you could, hang back and grind. And I don't feel like I have the same control over the story in Persona.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah.
So I don't know. I'm really enjoying Persona. I'm not sure if I'm going to end up liking it more than Shin Megami Tensei V, just because that game it was so good. I think
Yeah.
that the demon cataloging was better in SMT5 too.
Yeah,
Like
it's improved.
yeah, it's just easier to figure out, like, do I have this demon already? Do I need to get this one? I think the system where when you're combining demons and you're picking attributes and attacks, I think that was a little easier to understand in
Mhm.
SMT5. Just like the UI was a little more streamlined. But all that said, I am really enjoying Persona 5. Like,
Yeah.
I'm definitely going to finish it. I don't know how long it's going to take me to finish it because we've
Right.
got a million other games coming out, specifically RPGs coming out right now.
Right.
I don't know. I'm definitely going to finish it, but I don't know how long it's going to take me.
Yeah. I will say I think that uh, overall, Persona 5 Royal is probably my favorite Atlus JRPG. It's probably top of my list right now. It's close, right? There's a few others that are really good that I rank highly. Shin Megami Tensei 5, Nocturne is really high up there, but overall, I think that it's one of those games where there are pacing issues. It does feel to like it drags at points, and a lot of that does have to do with the life sim element. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. The game can feel like a slog at times. Right? There's periods of time where you're just kind of like, let's get to the next beat, and it feels like it's just right out of reach for a little bit too long. Um,
Hmm.
but I think in the in the late stages, if you buy in within the first two or three palaces, as you get to the later palaces and the story really ramps up in intensity, it finishes very strongly, more effectively than many games do. It maintains its momentum throughout the entire time, which is not something you would think you would say for an 80+ hour JRPG, but it really doesn't let off the momentum. And if anything, just feels smoother as the game goes on. And so that's something that I'm excited to see kind of where you land towards the end of it. Because I do think that there's a tendency in a few spots to, you know, for players to maybe drop it because yeah, it's a long game and there's some stuff that doesn't pace well. But overall, final picture, everything's said and done. I look back on it, and aside from one or two palaces that I was maybe less keen on, I I don't remember much that stands out as like, "Ugh, God, I don't want to do that again." Because to me, that's kind of like the marker of a good game, right? If I think about replaying a game and there's nothing that stands out as something I want to avoid or I hope I don't have to play again, that's a good sign because most games have that section where you're just like, I don't ever want to experience that again. That's not a segment I'm keen on doing more than once, and it
Hmm.
really is a barrier to replaying. But clearly, I played Persona 5. I held off on Royal for like 6 months. Then I was like, no, I have to play it, and I played it, and I beat it probably more cumulative hours, but in a much shorter time span than I played it the first time through. I kind of just barreled through Royal in a very, very unhealthy span of time. If I'm
Are
being
you are
fully
you
transparent.
gonna stay away from getting it on your Switch?
So the problem with getting it on my Switch is, while I would love to do that, I have Game Pass, and um, I've already reinstalled it on my PC since we decided to do this episode. I haven't booted it up yet. I'm trying to resist booting it up again, but it's very. I don't know if those of you that will look at the video. I've got the soundtrack back there on vinyl.
I was gonna ask if that was the collector's edition or what that was.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I've got the Royal soundtrack on vinyl and the standard Persona 5 soundtrack on vinyl. The collector's editions from, I think it was Fangamer did these. I might be getting that wrong. No, I am 8-bit. was the IM 8-bit
Oh yeah, love those guys.
collector's editions. Yeah, great company, but these are you know, probably the main reason I want to get back to the game and want to play it again is I don't know if we've talked about this. Actually, I know we haven't talked about it yet on this episode. We may have talked about it in the past, but this game's soundtrack rips. It
Yeah,
is so good. Maybe my favorite soundtrack of all time. It's up there for sure. Um, was it Shoji Meguro? I think is the composer for this game. I hope I didn't get that wrong. Um, it's just phenomenal, right? There's variants of day and night themes for different tracks. The dungeons have multiple themes within them, both for combat and exploration. Um, it's just really nice, like atmospheric, really like jazz inspired
hmm
um, soundtracks that just you know look, if you've never listened to a soundtrack by Shoji Meguro, you got to do it. The Persona games are so phenomenal. Some of the best music out there, and I think Persona 5 is maybe the highlight of what is a career of fantastic video game soundtracks.
high praise. I want to second that about the music. It's sometimes when you're playing games and especially with RPGs when you're hearing the same song for hours and hours and hours, the loop gets old.
Yeah.
You can tell when the loop is coming up. This is a game that um, I mean, it is definitely a loop, right? But you don't find
Hmm.
it annoying. Like the music is just enough in the background. It's just atmospheric enough that it's not overbearing, and I don't know. It just feels really natural
Hmm.
with whatever you're doing. The life sim part, it feels great in the dungeon crawling piece. It fits in really well there too, and there's enough variety between different spots in the city versus different parts
Yeah.
of the dungeon that the music just like it moves with you in a way that a lot
Hmm.
of other RPGs don't. They have a set song for the battle theme, they have a set song for the night cycle and the day cycle, and this is
Yeah.
much more widely varied than that.
Yeah, I mean, it's I can't remember the exact number, but it's the soundtrack is huge too. There's I think over 100 tracks across base game and royal, and not not too many duds on the soundtrack in general. So worth checking out again. It's hard for me to be like objective when critiquing a Persona game. I do think, like I said, there are flaws. It's not for everybody. The life sim stuff can be overwhelming. It can be a little bit off-putting for some players. The tropes and some of the like story beats might not land well for a lot of people. But overall, I think I don't ever hesitate, even for people that are not into like that anime aesthetic. I never hesitate to recommend this game if you're even a little interested in turn-based RPGs. Um, as the genre goes, it's up there in the top, and so I can't say enough that if any of what we've talked about today sounds like something you're into, um, you got to check it out. Not to mention Justin, you can confirm this for me maybe, but I've heard that the port is really a phenomenal port of Persona 5 Royal. Like I've heard it runs really well, that it's, very little in the way of stutter or stagger. Is that true? Is what I'm hearing correct?
100% true. It runs so smoothly, and on the OLED screen, I mean, so much of this game, plays with blacks and reds, and on the OLED screen, the
Yeah.
black really is. It's just so deep, and it makes the red pop even more. So yeah,
Yeah.
the port is great, and it just looks phenomenal on the Switch screen.
Yeah, I mean, it looks better than Shin Megami Tensei 5. I'll say that.
Yeah, for sure.
And that game came out many years after. So, um, look, I'm really excited to hear kind of where you land on the game once you've completed the whole thing. I imagine it'll be at least a month or so before, but I'd like to follow up with that a little bit once that's done. Um, any other thoughts? Any other comments you wanted to make on the game before we move on?
I'll just say, I put off playing Persona for so long because of like I said, the time commitment was really stressful for me. Within a few hours of playing 5, I had already bought 4 because I've heard
Nice.
4 is even better.
Yeah, Persona 4 Golden is some people definitely think it's the superior game. I'm on the fence there. It's really good. It's really, really good. Absolutely worth playing as well, but better, subjective.
Well, I didn't hesitate at all to buy the 4th one whenever I was really into the 5th
Yeah.
one. I'm looking forward to getting to that one. It's probably going to be next year, but looking
Yeah.
really forward to that. All right, let's move on and talk about our game recommendations of the week. So, aside
Yeah.
from Persona 5 Royal, which I think both of us are recommending here today,
Yeah.
what you been playing? What you recommending?
So, it's for those of you that have listened to the pod before and are familiar with my gaming habits. I jump around a lot. I'm all over the place. I we're a little bit past the window for it, but I completed Bayonetta 3 a couple weeks
Oh,
ago, 2
nice.
weeks ago. Got it when it came out, played it for about 3 days nonstop. Loved every second of it, with the exception of the just not good ending. The story and narrative in Bayonetta 3 was a major letdown after the first 2 games. A lot of problems I had with that game as far as that goes. But the moment to moment gameplay, the experience of playing Bayonetta 3 was everything I was hoping for and then some. Probably top tier, it's definitely for me a top tier action game. I've talked about my love of Devil May Cry before. I've compared Devil May Cry and Bayonetta, which I think is a very fair comparison. There's a lot of DNA that's shared there. Bayonetta 3 is my favorite of those games between both series. It's the pinnacle as far as gameplay goes. The demon summoning that they added, where you actually get to control Bayonetta's demons in addition to, like, independent of her this time around in like giant kaiju battles, or just like bringing them onto the combat stage to queue up a couple attacks, creates some really fun like combo potential where you can bring out a big demon, have him queue up 2 attacks, and then switch back to Bayonetta real quick, start a combo, switch back to the demon, queue up 2 more attacks, back to your combo, and it allows you to kind of like build this really like fantastic flow state in combat that just didn't exist in previous games. The exploration is cool. There's like, the levels feel a little bit more open-ended and kind of open worldy. They're stages, but they feel more expansive and open. Collectibles and side quests and things are a little bit repetitive, but that's to be expected from games like this. I think it doesn't really detract from what is just a really flashy, really fun, enjoyable combat experience. Again, I personally, and I've heard a lot of people online say similarly, thought that the story really, really let both the character down and the series down as a whole.
I've
I
heard that.
hope that I hope that we get a 4th one. Still, I want to see where the story goes. I'm hoping that we'll see more from that, and they can recover. But it's not the case for everyone. Some people liked the new direction, and great, glad, right? But regardless of that, I don't think you play Bayonetta games for the story. I think you pay it for the combat and the set pieces, and both of those are firing on all cylinders. It's Platinum Games at their best as far as combat goes in a very long time. Worth checking out. I think I clocked in around 21 hours or so when I completed it. I took my time with it. I did all I tried to get as much stuff in each of the missions as I could and do all the additional bonus missions. So it took me around 21 hours to be worth the play. And then I'll just real quickly say I'm also playing God of War Ragnarok over on the PlayStation 5, and that game is phenomenal. So back to back, just great games right now. And yeah, those are my recommendations. What about you, Justin? Where are you at right now? I mean,
Definitely
obviously Persona
recommending.
5, but
Yeah. Aside from Persona 5, definitely recommending Harvestella. I'm really
yeah.
enjoying that game for what it is. If you go into that game and you're expecting like a really, really fleshed out RPG, you're not
Hmm.
going to get it. It's
Okay.
truly a farming sim. It's actually a little light on the farming, the actual farming, but it's got the same sort of farming sim like qualities you come to expect.
Hmm.
And the combat is, hack and slash. It's fun,
Yeah.
hack and
Okay.
slash combat. But I'm really enjoying it. I think it's a really relaxing game, actually. Like, I've never
Yeah.
fallen asleep while holding my Switch before, but I was playing this one pretty late the other night, and I just kind of like dozed off for a second and came back because it's outside of the combat. Like, the exploration is really fun. It's got this time mechanic that, in much the same way that Persona 5 has, you only can do certain things in a given amount of time, but it's a real time clock. So where
Mm.
Persona, like, you're choosing, like, I'm going to study and that's going to take my afternoon block. In Harvestella, it's I have to go to this part of the map, and as I'm walking to that part of the map, time is going to go really fast. So I have to be,
Yeah.
strategic about when I leave in the morning. Do I do my chores around the farm first? And if I need to leave one part of the map and get back to it later, I've got to get enough time, save myself enough time that I get back before, I think it's like 2 or 3 in the morning. You pass out wherever you are from exhaustion, and then you lose half your
Oh yeah.
cash. Um, I think you would really like it, actually.
Yeah. Yeah. I plan to pick it up. It's just we're in such a busy season right now. It's been hard for me to find time for anything outside of what I've been playing. Plus, we have Pokemon coming out tomorrow
Oh,
at some time of record.
yeah.
We'll talk more about that. I'm assuming that'll probably be next week's episode. But yeah, it looks good. Like you said, I've heard that um, it's kind of light on both fronts. Is kind of my one kind of reservation, as I've heard that, like you said, it's not a fully fleshed RPG. It's also not a fully fleshed farming sim. So
Mm-mm.
it's kind of just like a nice casual in between, right? And I
Yeah,
think like it sounds to me like the perfect $30 discount
yeah,
purchase.
absolutely. It
Um,
it almost feels like one of those cozy games, but it's not.
yep, yep,
I think you would really like it just based on. I think I think the real strength of the game is the strategy piece. You've got to
okay,
decide what you're going to do to get it in within the certain amount of time of the season. I think a season is like 30 days.
hmm,
So you've got to start growing your crops at a certain amount of time. If it's going to take them 5 days to be ready to be harvested, or if you're making your way through a dungeon, like if you're dungeon crawling, the clock is going the entire time you're moving through it. So you've got to be strategic about when you start, and then I'm this far in. I don't think I'm going to make it all the way back or all the way through it, so I've got to turn back and go back the way I came so I can get home in time before I pass out. I think the strategy piece is actually the strongest part of it,
yeah,
but
yeah. I mean,
really
I'm
enjoying that
I'm
one.
I'm into it. I definitely will pick it up. Like I said, it'll be a discount game when I've got a slow period, but um, a lot on the horizon. Some interesting stuff coming around the bend soon. Plus, I still
Yep.
need to pick up Sonic Frontiers. I'm hearing all the mixed reviews, but hey, we're already seeing those deep discounts that you and I both anticipated would come
Right.
around. So, hey, I can shell out $30 for a new open world Sonic game. But
Yeah,
yeah,
sure.
I think
While we're talking about some non Nintendo games too, and just throw this one in there. You mentioned God of War. I started playing Pentiment
yeah,
on my Xbox. It's if you're not familiar with it, it's sort of just like this Renaissance era point and click adventure. It's a murder mystery,
hmm,
and it's really fun. It's got like a 15 or 20
yeah.
hour gameplay, but wow,
The
it's
pedigree
really
behind
fun.
it, the pedigree behind it is phenomenal too. I mean, that's I believe it's Obsidian, right?
Yeah.
um, and particularly a small team in Obsidian. But this is, the Fallout New Vegas guys, which for those of you that have never played it, Fallout New Vegas is an all timer. It's up there with Skyrim as far as open world story heavy RPGs go. Um, and so I've heard really, really good things about Pentiment. I've got a couple games that I'm working through right now that I want to finish up before I jump over, God of War, and a little horror game, a little indie horror game called Signalis. That again, if you're into survival horror at all, especially like the old school Resident Evils or Silent Hills, check out Signalis. It's on Game Pass. It's also available on Switch. Um, it's really, 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 really good. But once I've got those out of the way, I'm planning to hop over to Pentiment and give that a check, because yeah, it sounds like exactly up my alley. Narrative heavy, adventure game with a really cool looking medieval aesthetic and art style that just screams, please play me. Like, if you love anything narrative based, pick me up, and I'm here for it.
Yeah, it's so detailed. I mean, it almost has like a working footnote system where if you're confused about what a word means that one character says to another, you it's underlined, you press a button and it zooms out and shows you
Nice.
like a bigger book that your story's happening within, and it's got like parentheticals that explain what's going on for that particular time of year, or certain prayer that they're talking about or whatever it
Yeah,
is. And
yeah.
it's got illustrations that go along with it. Oh, dude, it's just awesome to look at.
That's great. Yeah, I'm definitely gonna check it out. It doesn't hurt that it's on Game Pass, right? It's one of those ones. It's pretty much an easy grab if you're, if you're subscribed to that service.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, let's leave it there, Matthew.
Yeah,
Uh, Great to talk as always.
yeah,
I
pleasure,
want to
man.
Yeah, I want to thank everybody else for listening and subscribing, and we'll be back in your feeds next week.
Have a good one, everybody.